Alright guys, welcome back to What Could Go Wrong. So, gonna be doing a quick run through on Blood Death Knight. Alright, so Blood Death Knight is actually one of the easier tanks to play in my opinion. Um, there is a little bit of diversity in the build for lower keys, but once you get up into the higher keys and you start doing more, then it does get a little bit specific. The playstyle is very forgiving. Oddly enough, Blood Death Knights are actually one of the more tanky Death Knights compared to most other tanks. Very forgiving, very easy to make a mistake. In my opinion, I would say the only thing easier would be probably a Guardian Druid. Okay. But overall, lots of diversity, lots of different options here. Okay. Um, with that being said, I'm gonna get into it. Starting off with stat priority. All right. So first things first, like we have a lot of different stats that are going to just make our life easier. And we have a lot of stats that are just kind of there and they help, but they're not super priority. Okay. So depending on which specialization, or I'm sorry, depending on which hero talent you choose, is going to determine stats and stat priority and what you're looking for the most of. Okay. With that being said, I am running a sand lane. All right. Oops. So I'm running sand lane. Okay. I don't really mess around with Deathbringer. I didn't really like the playstyle of it. I didn't like how button pushy it was. I didn't like the way the rotation played out. So I never really messed with it. But Sand Lane offers a lot more survivability options. So with that being said, back into our stats. Okay. So overall, strength, stamina, and armor are always going to be our priority. Okay. So you always want to go with whatever's going to offer you the most of those three. Honestly, strength is going to be number one, but having that stamina and armor bonus, like that, they all three kind of balance with each other. Strength is just slightly better, just because of the amount of threat generation that we get and the parry increase. Okay. Going into secondary stats. All right. So first up, we got haste. All right. Haste is our primary stat and the primary thing we're looking at just because of the way it plays into with our sand lane and the way that it allows us to do things. It also does give us a little bit of a faster GCD. And that is good because that helps us get more defensives off, that helps us get more attacks off, and overall just survive a little bit better. Okay. Next up is going to be mastery. So it doesn't really matter what spec of Death Knight you're playing. Mastery is a very, very strong secondary stat for all three specs, both hero talents. Doesn't really matter. Mastery is kind of what you're looking for. Okay. Just because of what it does for us and it increasing the healing that we get makes us more self-sustaining, takes pressure off the healer, just a lot easier all in all. Okay. Next up is going to be versatility. All right, versatility is going to increase our damage and healing done. So right now, Death Knights are in a really weird place where we don't do a whole lot of damage, but we do take a lot of damage. Okay, with that damage we take, we send it back into healing, which plays into our mastery. Decreasing the amount of damage we take and increasing the amount of healing we do definitely create puts us in a situation where versatility, having higher versatility is going to just be better for us. Okay. Overall, the less damage you take and the more healing you do, that's like a win-win for Death Knights because whatever damage we take, we heal it back. It's just it's a solution, right? Next up is going to be critical strike. Okay, so crit is actually not super important for Death Knights. Like, don't ignore it, but like, don't prioritize it. Don't try and get it. It's just not something that we are going to go out of our way to get. There's not a whole lot of benefit from it. There is a little bit, but it's not enough benefit to prioritize it as a stat. All right. So overall, when you're looking at your gear and when you're gearing a Blood Death Knight, strength, stamina, and armor are always going to be priority number one. Haste, mastery, and versatility are going to be your primary number two. Okay. You're going to hit some diminishing returns, but at the same time, like, you can balance it enough to where you're keeping all of the stats good. Generally speaking, you want about 45% mastery, you want about 24% haste, and then you're going to want about 10% versatility. That's really where your sweet spot is. And then you can really kind of put the rest into crit, I guess. But like at the same time, once you balance out these three where you want them to be, that is ultimately the best possible option. Okay. So next up, let's talk about talents. All right. So this talent tree is pretty much what you're going to want to run for higher keys, especially when you get into a point where you need to be more tanky and you need to be more staying alive. Um, Overall, like there's really not much to say. This is just kind of like what you're going to run. I do have multiple builds over here. Um, but some of them majority like I have one the build I made was majority for lower keys. There's a couple copies that I got just from people who are a little bit more knowledgeable and I was testing out their builds and seeing how it worked. But in general, this is what it's going to look like. So starting off, we'll look at our spec tree. I'm sorry, our class tree. So looking at that, you want Icebound Fortitude, plays directly into our tier set, gives you a free out for a stun if you make a mistake. If it's a damage reduction, like it does a lot for you. That's gonna just prove to benefit you. Okay. Next up is gonna be cleaving strikes. Okay, we want to take this because this increases the amount of heart strike hits that we get. So we can hit 3 additional enemies plus our baseline of already hitting um, I believe it's 2 is the baseline, so that gives us 5 target cleave while we're in Death and Decay. And then when we use our Dancing Rune weapon, that gives us an additional 5 targets for our Dancing Rune weapon. And it really just overall it plays into each other. So those are the two at this top section here. Those are the two that we're taking no matter what. Okay. Next up is going to be Mind Freeze because we need that interrupt. And this is a runic power generation and it's also a cooldown reduction for our interrupts. So it gives us more interrupts, gives us more runic power, both of which are going to help us on our rotation. All right. Anti-magic barrier. Definitely going to take this no matter what. Doesn't really matter. Okay, it's going to increase the amount of magic damage we can absorb. It's also going to reduce the cooldown. Either way it goes, we're taking it. Okay. As far as the rest of these, you kind of play around with them, do what you want to do. Okay. I've seen a lot of different people run a lot of different builds in these 2 rows here. Okay. Next up, these 3 lines or these 3 talents right here. So any magic zone, we're going to take that because that is good for your group. Your healer will thank you. All right. Icy Talons is just kind of like a personal help for us. Okay. Um, it's an attack speed increase, helps us out, but more than anything, it gives us access to this left hand side of our tree over here. All right. And then Unholy Bond, that is beneficial because a lot of the Rune Forge that we're going to take, those are specifically designed to help us in some capacity. Okay. So having those effects increased is just almost universally impossible not to take. All right. As far as the rest of the tree is concerned, okay, I take Soul Reaper because it's a good damage. It's a good damage booster. It helps with bosses and single target. It does generate threat. It can be used as an AoE if you time it right. Um, this is more just for crowd control. All right, this is to benefit our anti-magic zone. This is Gloom Ward is almost impossible not to run with because absorbs on us, especially if you're running with a disciplined priest or a mistweaver monk or anything that's going to give you an absorb to include your own personal absorbs, which we have 2 of that I'll get into more in rotation. Having those be 15% more effective just makes you that much more tanky. All right. As far as the rest of these, I think outside of Blood Draw and Abomination Limb, you can kind of play around with whatever you want towards this bottom. Okay. I run a little bit more magic reduction just because that's what I was dealing with a lot last season. Still some of it this season, but again, like it's just kind of universally good to have that magic absorb because we have very little passive magic absorbs. So like if there is magic damage coming out, it does get a little bit harder to stay alive and it's hard to heal that back. And so having those absorbs and having that extra magic boost, it can save your life potentially. Okay. As far as your hero talents go, again, I am only playing Sin Lane. I think it's a lot more fun. I know a lot of people who run Vampiric Speed over running Newly Turned. I personally run Newly Turned because I find it's better to get people back up, and if you're resing a ranged into melee, having that 20% absorb shield just helps them and the healer. Having them come back at 100% health, like it's just better. Um, Sanguine Sin versus Pack of the Sand Lane. I've run both. I use both. It just kind of depends on what you need. I've been using Pack of the Sand Lane because I have been making bigger pulls. I have been doing a lot more go crazy and get things done fast just because I am currently still doing lower keys. But overall, running either one, it just kind of, I mean, you just really have to look at like what you need, how you want to play, and how it's all going to work. Okay. So that's pretty much our hero talents. We don't have a whole lot of choice nodes, which does make things a lot nicer for us. Up here, running Bloody Fortitude versus Vampiric Aura. Again, I run Bloody Fortitude just because of the Icebound Fortitude um, increase and the help, plus getting that cooldown reduction. Like it's just slightly better than having that leech, especially with the way that our tier set works this season. But again, figuring out like how you want to play and how you want to do it is going to affect your talents a lot. All right. Moving into the spec tree. Okay. There are so many different options for the spec tree. I know some Death Knights who prefer the left side of the tree, some prefer the right side of the tree, some go down the middle like I do. I know I've seen some builds that just kind of take the best of each one. Okay, having the best of each tree, it can help. I personally have started going down the middle. When I started pushing into tens last season, I found that going down the middle offered me the best survivability. But overall, you can't really go wrong as long as you pick up a few key talents. Okay, so our spec tree is very simple, very diverse, very easy to figure out. But in general, what you're gonna do, you're always gonna take these top four. Okay, Vampiric Blood, impossible to run without. Marrow Rend, impossible to run without. So this top is always pretty much gonna be like this, right? You might you might not use improved heart strike. You might switch it up, but like in general, these levels are gonna look the same. When you move down, all right, Dancing Rune Weapon, you will always take that talent. It is virtually impossible to be effective as a Death Knight without that talent. Okay. Um, Running improved Bone Shield, that's helpful if you're running Sand Lane. So you want that talent as Sand Lane. Outside of that, I feel like it could really probably go either way, whether you take it. Okay. Rune Tap, again, having this, especially if you can precast it. If you can precast it, that gives your healer 4 seconds to keep up. You The survivability that you will get is insane. All right. And if you time it right, you can pop both charges back to back. And then you have 8 seconds of damage reduction by 20%. 20% reduced damage helps. And then you have time to get your other defensive off. You have time to build up your runic power. You have time to get your bone shield going. You have time to do everything that you need to do to survive. So Rune Tap is again, I wouldn't say like it's a you have no choice, you have to take it, but it's a pretty important one. Okay. Moving down the middle, again, how you want to go with this next row could go either way. Um, the next talent that you are going to take no matter what. Every build I've seen has taken these talents. Sanguine Ground, dealing 6% increased damage and receiving 5% more health while you're standing your Death and Decay. Given the fact that we have Death and Decay down 24/7, as we're playing, doesn't matter. Single target AoE, and it should be down on cooldown. Your D&D should always be on cooldown. At least one charge of it, if not both charges on cooldown for the entire pull. Okay, that 5% increased healing helps if we run out of runic power. If we don't have a defensive up for a few seconds, our healer is healing us for their normal heal plus an additional 5%, and that is a game changer. Okay. Consumption versus Blood Drinker. Okay. Blood Drinker is really just gonna it adds another button. Um, but like it's not necessarily gonna help us. Whereas running consumption, okay. If we're hitting people in front of us, which as a tank you always want to be in front, okay. It's going to essentially it adds an AoE button, but like we get so much back from it. Okay. Getting that damage, increasing everything for 6 seconds, like, I mean, a self-healing for us, like, there's a lot going on with this talent, okay? So, it's honestly, it's hard to remember sometimes what all it does, but, like, you're pretty much always gonna take this just for the returns you're gonna get from it, okay? Next up is gonna be Tombstone, okay? Tombstone, we're taking every time, no questions asked, okay? It will consume up to 5 bone shield charges, which we are always going to use it at 5 charges or more. Okay. But that's going to give us an absorb shield, and it's going to um, generate runic power. It's going to deal damage. It's going to increase max. Um, it's going to deal damage based off our max health. Like just the overall just usefulness of this talent, it is a game changer for so many different reasons, and it can save your life, especially if you pop your dancing rune weapon, then you hit Marrow Rend, and then you pop that tombstone. It can save your life, especially early in a pull. Right? Anytime that I'm pulling more than 3 targets, I'm gonna rune tap, I'm gonna death and decay, I'm going to dancing rune weapon, I'm gonna Marrow Rend, I'm gonna tombstone. In that order. It's just how it's gonna go because of what that does for us and how that helps us out. All right. As far as this next row, this is this is helpful because it gives us a defensive back faster because we are blood striking quite a bit, or I'm sorry, death striking quite a bit. So this will give us a good amount of runic power um, expenditures, which will decrease the cooldown of our vampiric blood, which gives us vampiric blood faster, which can save your life, right? Um, this one, I mean, it helps. It's just kind of one of those helps. You don't need it, but again, you don't have to take these two, but they're just recommended because faster or reduce cooldowns on your defensives and faster uptime on your um or I'm sorry, reduced cooldown on defensives gives you more uptime, which is just going to make you that much more tanky. All right. These two we're pretty much taking just so we can get to Purgatory and Bladestorm. Okay. So I have figured out that Blood Draw will trigger first. Purgatory will trigger second. Okay. Purgatory is our cheat death. So running this Blood Draw and Purgatory gives you 2 cheat deaths, plus when we run our Rune Forge, that gives us essentially 3 cheat deaths. Okay, so you can mess up 3 times and still potentially survive, right? Depending on the amount of damage and how bad you mess up, right? Running Bladestorm, honestly, this is just kind of a damage thing. It's an AoE. It's good for generating threat. It helps. I like running it because I like having the ability to generate more threat faster. So overall, I think that it's worth taking. All right. Next up, let's go into Rune Forging. All right. So overall, you have a lot of different options, right? So as you can see, I run Rune of Sanguination. Okay. Basically, what this does is it causes our Death Strike to heal us more, and it's a cheat death. Okay. It's not perfect because it comes over 8 seconds. So like it can get a little bit dicey at times and it doesn't always work perfectly, but it helps, especially for those beginning of the dungeon pulls when we don't have any runic power and we're going into a pull essentially completely blind, right? It's not that we can't survive it, it's that we need a little bit more help until we start generating our runic power and we start getting our death strikes out and we start rolling our defensives the way that we need to properly. That is what is the game changer for Death Knights and the difference between living and dying, essentially. Okay. There are a couple of different options that we can run situationally, but overall, Rune of Sanguination is probably the best option for us. All right. So, next up, let's get into our utility and defensives. Okay. So, as far as utility goes, Death Knights do not offer a whole lot. Okay. We have Anti Magic Zone, Path of Frost, Chain of Ice, but they're all situational. If there's no magic damage, if there's no reason to slow people down, I, again, if we don't need to walk across water, there's not a whole lot we offer to the group. Okay. That's the extent of our utility. Okay. So not necessarily the best, but at the same time, we're also not the worst. Okay. Let's get into defensives. All right. So I've already talked a little bit about them, so I'll go ahead and recover. Tombstone, as a talent, it will give us an absorb shield and it will help you survive. Okay. Rune tap, it's a damage reduction. That's just going to benefit and help us that much more. Okay. Vampiric Blood didn't really go too much into this. Basically, what this is going to do for us is going to increase our maximum health and it's going to increase all the healing we get. And it's going to last for 14 seconds. Okay. It is on a longer cooldown. So, generally speaking, if I know that a pull is going to be dangerous, I'll pop Vampiric Blood just to make sure that I know that I'm good on a dangerous pull. Outside of that, I very much will use this reactively. If I start noticing that, my healer is struggling a little bit with the group, I can pop this and then I can keep myself alive and I can give my healer one less thing to worry about. It's also very good to use during tank busters and any type of one shots that we might take. Okay. So, especially if you use Vampiric Blood in with Tombstone, they will play off of each other and they will help, and it gives you just that much more survivability. Okay. Lichborn, this is really just a damage reduction. The leech does help. It does make us immune to charms and fears and sleeps. That can be situationally helpful, but more than anything, we want to use this as a damage reduction. Okay. Because if it's going to reduce our damage by 15 and we know we're fixing to take a lot of damage and we don't have anything else up that we can use at the moment, Lichborn is a solid solution to that problem. Okay. Icebound Fortitude is very helpful because there are a lot of stuns and there are a lot of things like that. And then damage reduction. This one, Icebound Fortitude offers the most damage reduction we get out of any other ability in the game. Okay. Um, it's overall very helpful. It plays directly into our tier set, so we're not necessarily going to click this as often based off the procs for our tier set, though. Okay. Next up is going to be Marrow Rend. So Marrow Rend is an offensively defensive uh, spell for us. Basically, what it does is it's going to do damage and it's going to generate bone shards and it's going to give us a bone shield. Okay, that's an armor increase. Uh, it's, I mean, every time we get hit with a melee, we get hit at increased armor and we lose a charge, but it's okay because every time we tap Mirror Rend, we're good. In a perfect world, you want to get to 12 stacks of Bone Shield. Once you have 12 stacks of Bone Shield, that's where you want to stay, and you don't want to use your Mirror Rend as much, okay? Anything past, or anytime you use it past 12 stacks, you're not getting anything out of it. It's just a damage dealer. Okay, so like you have other abilities that will deal damage that are going to be the better option. All right. And then last but not least, our final defensive for the video is Death Strike. Death Strike is going to take the amount of damage that we've taken, heal us for a percentage, and that's it. It's gonna give us, I mean, it says right here, as you can see in the corner, um, it's a minimum of 8.5% of our maximum health. So if the minimum baseline that we're getting is 8%, 8% can be the difference between dead and alive. Okay, especially if you get a big tank buster that you have to use one of your big defensive sword, you take all that damage, and then you get healed for 30% of that damage right back. That is one of the strongest, most self-sustaining damage abilities that we have, without a doubt. Okay? It's absolutely massive of a game changer. Okay? So that's pretty much our utility and our cooldowns. Again, there's not a whole lot to speak for. We don't offer a raid buff to the group. We don't offer a whole lot to the group. We do have a battle res, which can be helpful, but again, that also assumes that your group is dying, and if you are going through the key and things are going well, you're not offering a lot to the group. Okay. Next up, we'll go into our rotation. Okay. So the rotation for Blood Death Knight is actually really, really simple. Okay. The difference between Blood Death Knight and most other tanks is the beginning of our rotation is primarily just defensives. Okay. We're not using attack spells right out the gate necessarily. Um, and our rotation is also going to vary based off of whether we have runic power, whether we don't have runic power, whether we have runic power and defensives, whether we have runic power but no defensives, do we have no runic power and no defensives? Eh, there are so many different rotations that you have with a Blood Death Knight, all of it being situational. Okay. I don't have enough time in the video to show you every single one of the possible rotations. Okay. So I'm going to go over all of them, and I'm going to give you the spells to use. Um, and that's pretty much how I'm gonna do this video. Okay. So very baseline. The first rotation that we will talk about is opening rotation is going to be really, I'll just start here. Okay, so right now I have no runic power. I have my defensives. So we'll start here. Okay, so at the beginning of the pull, right, I'm going to precast rune tap about a second before I do make the pull. Okay, so I'm going to rune tap, death and decay, mirror rend, dancing rune weapon, mirror rend again, tombstone. That order every time, right? The reason why you want to do this is because going into that first pull, your primary concern is survive and generate runic power. Okay. So when you cast your rune tap, you're surviving. Drop your D&D, you're getting better healing, you're surviving. Mirror Rend once, so now we're taking hits with increased armor. And then Dancing Rune Weapon, so now our attacks are going to be more. You Mirror Rend a second time. That gives you all the charges you need. It should bump you up to around 10 charges of Bone Shield. Then you Tombstone, right? So now we've got damage reduction, increased healing, a shield, right? Increased armor shield. Then we've got better attacks. We've got more bone shields. And then tombstoning is giving us an absorb, which, as we saw with our talents, as we saw with our other passives and other abilities, we see that that is being increased. So now you are set to live through that first pull. Okay. There will always be times that you just fall over. Okay. Like it happens. Don't let it discourage you. Just kind of know, hey, when I go back in and I go get this aggro back, I need more than just rune tap. All right. And that's okay. All right. Like if we have to rune tap and then vampiric blood and then go into our death and decay, mirror rend, dancing rune weapon, tombstone, that's fine. Okay. Because this is the most dangerous time for any blood death knight is going to be when we have 0 runic power. Okay. If we have 0 runic power, we have essentially no way of healing back any of the damage. So whatever we take, we are taking that damage. Okay. Can be very difficult to can be very difficult for healers to keep up. I'm just going to be honest with you. All right. The first little bit of a pull makes a difference. Okay. Now, as far as holding aggro, you want to Vampiric Strike or Heart Strike on cooldown. You want to keep Death and Decay down on cooldown. If it's AoE, you're going to use Consumption, you're going to use Blood Boil. Like, in reality, the single target rotation is no different, okay? So, let's go into our attack rotation. You've already made the pull, you're already in there, you're doing it, all right? Your priority is really going to be 3 things. 1, 12 stacks of bone shield. So mirror rend at 12 stacks constantly. Blood boil always on cooldown. Death and decay always on cooldown. Those 3 things are your number 1 priority when it comes to attacks, okay? Single target or AoE doesn't really matter. That's what we want, okay? Now, when you start dropping below probably 75% health, Heart Strike becomes important. If you are below 75% health, Heart Strike is your priority, right? Keep your Bone Shields stacks up, get your Heart Strikes in. So a lot of times what I'll do is every other attack will be a Heart Strike, or a Death Strike, excuse me. So I'll Mirror Rend, then I'll Death Strike, Blood Boil, Death Strike, D&D, Death Strike, Heart Strike, Death Strike, Heart Strike, Death Strike, right? Doesn't really matter. As long as you're pushing out those Death Strikes to keep yourself well maintained, you're going to be fine. If you run out of runic power, obviously start skipping it, okay? You want Vampiric Strike to be used. You want Heart Strike to be used. Those will generate good runic power. Mirror Rend generates runic power. Everything down here is going to generate your runic power, okay? Now, let's say, for instance, we're going to circle back a little bit. How do you open a pull when you have runic power? Okay, so I have runic power generated. I have attacks generated. I'm ready to go, right? A lot of times, I will run into the group. I will Death and Decay. I'll use my Abomination Limb. If it's a single target, you skip the A-Bomb Limb. Okay, but I'll run into the group, drop my Death and Decay, drop my Abomination Limb, getting everything up. I'm mirror rending. Everything's coming to me. I'm Death Striking. I'm chilling, right? Then I just go straight into my attack rotation. Blood Boil is being used on cooldown. Death and Decay is on cooldown. Mirror Rend to keep 12 stacks. Heart Strike and Vampiric Strike in between. Death Strike to stay alive. Throw up a Dancing Rune weapon. Popping everything off. Like, you're just using your abilities, okay? And then you're using your cooldowns or your defensive cooldowns based off of how you need it to go, okay? So, you're about to make a pull. You've got runic power. You've got no defensives up. Nothing changes. You're just going to go in. You're going to be a little bit more cautious. You're maybe not going to pull 3 packs at a time. You maybe just pull that 1 pack and be like, hey, I need defensives. Small pull. Hey, save your cooldowns. Small pull. You know, something like that so your group knows, oh, he's getting his defensives back. Then we're going to do a big pull. We'll just AoE these guys down. We're good. All right? You have no defensives. You have no runic power. You have nothing to really help yourself. Do not ever pull more than 3 mobs. All right? You will fall over. You will die if you pull more than 3 mobs. All right? When you make that pull of no runic power and no defensives, pull those 3, that group of 3, pull them, get runic power, get your defensives back. One of the two. If you try and go big with no defensives and no runic power, you're gonna die. Your tier set will not save you. Your healer will not save you. All right? It doesn't really matter what you do. Stay small, stay smart with your pulls. All right? But overall, that is going to be Blood Death Knight. All right? I will be posting some more keys hopefully over the next few days. I will get some keys set up to post of Blood Death Knight runs. I am maining a Blood Death Knight this season. So that makes it that much easier for me to essentially just like post a lot of Blood Death Knight content. Give you a chance to see the rotation. You'll see how I do things. I'll do a couple voiceovers on a few keys just so that like I can kind of talk people through what I'm doing. There's really not a whole lot to talk about when I'm running keys, so I don't generally voice over it. But I will try to do a couple, especially on some simpler keys. If I'm ever doing some homework keys, talk over those, like talk through like, hey, this is what needs to be interrupted. Hey, this is what this boss does. This is what that does. We'll just be talking through. Or if I'm running with friends, I may end up in Discord and I'll just give our little talks. So you guys kind of hear the call outs, things of that nature. But again, if you like the video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll get more up. Hope you guys have a good time. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see y'all next time.